Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for a deep dive into something truly mind-bending?
I think this one might be my favorite yet.
Yeah, this one is really out there. We're tackling telepathy today, and our guide is a paper from 1940 by, get this, Hans Berger.
As in the Berger who invented the EEG.
The one and only. You know those brainwave readings you see in all the sci-fi movies? That's his invention.
Wow, I didn't realize that connection. So, what does the inventor of the EEG have to say about telepathy?
Well, here's the thing. He believed it was real. This paper we're diving into lays out his whole argument, and honestly, it's a wild ride.
I'm intrigued already. How does he even start to make a case for something like telepathy?
You're not going to believe this.
Yeah.
He kicks things off with a personal story, a near-death experience, no less, that sparked his fascination with this stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay, now I'm really hooked. What happened?
He almost got crushed by a runaway cannon when he was a young man. Pretty terrifying, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But where does telepathy come in?
The truly eerie part. His sister, who was miles away at the time, somehow knew something terrible had happened to him.
That's chilling. I wonder if that sense of knowing was just a coincidence or if there's really something more to it.
It definitely makes you wonder, right? And Berger uses this experience, as intense as it was, to make a point. He suggests that many of us have had these weird moments, these glimmers of connection with someone far away that we can't easily explain.
Like a whisper of something beyond our normal senses. It's certainly a compelling way to start an argument for telepathy. But I'm guessing he doesn't just rely on anecdotes, right?
No way. He brings in all sorts of evidence, citing research on spontaneous cases, experiments with telepathy and hypnosis. He even talks about Tibetan lamas.
Wait, Tibetan lamas. Now that's something I didn't expect. What does he say about them?
He references this fascinating researcher, Alexandra David Neal. She spent years living among the lamas and witnessed them practicing what they called sending messages over a distance.
So we're talking about techniques for intentional telepathic communication.
That's exactly what Berger is suggesting. And it ties into his whole thing about making a clear distinction between what he calls genuine telepathy and other phenomena that might seem similar but have totally different explanations.
Okay, I'm curious. What's the difference according to Berger?
He's really adamant that true telepathy isn't about reading body language or picking up subtle cues. It's about the direct transfer of thoughts from one mind to another, no matter how far apart they are.
That's a bold claim. So where does he go from there? How does he even begin to explain how something like that might be possible?
Well, he dives into research by scientists like Alfred Lehman, August Forel, Hippolyte Bernheim, all of whom did experiments with telepathy, especially using hypnosis.
Hypnosis and telepathy. That's a fascinating combination. What did these researchers find?
Berger admits that the results were kind of mixed, some hits and some misses. But he argues that there's enough data out there that can't be easily dismissed as just chance or trickery.
So he's saying there's a signal in all the noise. Interesting. But what exactly were these experiments like? Were they literally trying to get people to read each other's minds in a lab?
Not exactly. Berger is way more interested in those cases where specific information seems to pass between people without any physical means. And get this, he started noticing patterns in the roles of sender and receiver that he found super intriguing.
Oh, now that's what I'm talking about. Spill the tea. What did he observe?
He noticed that the person sending the telepathic message often felt really drained afterward, like they'd put in a ton of mental effort.
Almost like they were using a hidden muscle, pushing something out with their minds. And what about on the receiving end?
He found that people were way more receptive when they were relaxed or in a state of focused attention.
Interesting. So it's not just about passively waiting for a message to arrive. There seems to be an active component on both sides of the equation.
It makes you wonder, right? What kind of mental state is actually best for sending or receiving these messages?
It really does. It's like Berger is hinting at a kind of energetic exchange, a push and pull between minds. But what I find really remarkable is that he doesn't settle for purely psychic explanations. He really wants to ground telepathy in science.
Fascinating.
He insists that even though telepathy seems strange and we can't explain it easily, it still has to involve some kind of physical process, even if we haven't figured out what it is yet.
That's a really interesting point. It's like how we can't see radio waves with our eyes, but we know they're real because they can carry signals across huge distances.
Exactly. And that's where Berger's thinking gets really interesting. He introduces this concept of psychic energy.
Okay, now things are about to get philosophical.
You said it. We're wading into the deep end now. So before we took that break, we were really starting to explore this concept of psychic energy and how it might connect to telepathy. Remember we were talking about Berger and how he thought that this energy could be like transformed or converted from the electrical activity that's going on in our brains all the time, the same stuff he was measuring with his EEG.
Yeah, it is a pretty big leap, isn't it? Thinking that our thoughts could have some kind of energy connected to them.
It definitely takes some mental gymnastics, but think about it this way. Our bodies do this kind of energy transformation all the time, right?
Huh. Now that you mention it, yeah. Like we take the chemical energy from food and turn it into all sorts of other forms of energy.
Exactly. You've got mechanical energy so our muscles can move, electrical energy in our nerves to send signals all over the place, even heat to keep our bodies at the right temperature. So it's not like energy transformation is a foreign concept in biology.
I'm with you so far. But if we're going to entertain this idea of psychic energy for a minute, how would it actually work? Like, how would it even get from one person's mind to another? It's not like thoughts can just fly through the air like little invisible paper airplanes.
Right, that's where Berger really had to get creative. He believed that this psychic energy, if it exists, could create a kind of wave, sort of like radio waves that would travel through space.
Hmm. So like invisible vibes traveling from brain to brain. But back then, I mean, he didn't have any way to actually detect those waves, right?
Nope, not with the technology available at the time. But he pointed to the success of wireless telegraphy, sending messages through the air without wires as an example of how we know unseen forces can carry information.
Oh, that's clever. It was pretty mind-blowing back then that voices could travel invisibly across entire continents because of radio waves. It's almost like Berger was saying, hey, what if our brains are even more incredible than that?
Exactly. He was looking at the cutting edge tech of his day and imagining if our brains could pull off something even more amazing. He really saw the brain as a kind of biological transmitter and receiver capable of sending and receiving these signals that we haven't fully figured out how to decode yet.
It's a really cool concept
Yeah.
for sure. But wouldn't those theoretical psychic waves, if they even exist, have to be fundamentally different from the kinds of electromagnetic waves we're familiar with, like radio waves and light and all that?
You're spot on. And it's something that Berger himself acknowledged and struggled with in his paper. He recognized that if the psychic energy is real, it would have to interact with the physical world in a way that's unlike anything we know in physics.
Okay, so it's not just like adding another type of wave to the electromagnetic spectrum. It would have to be something totally different.
Right. He even used the analogy of light and how light interacts differently with different materials, like how it passes through glass, gets absorbed by a black surface, or reflects off a mirror.
Ah, okay. So is he saying that this psychic energy, if it's real, might have its own set of rules
Yeah.
about how it behaves and interacts with the world?
That's exactly it. And while he didn't have the scientific knowledge or the tools to really explore those hypothetical rules back in his day, he strongly believed that further research could help us crack the code of psychic energy and figure out how it might play a role in things like telepathy.
So it's like he was drawing this map of a whole new scientific territory, even though he couldn't explore it fully himself. That's pretty bold. But what I find really interesting about Berger's work is that it goes beyond trying to just explain telepathy. It's almost like he's making a bigger point about the nature of consciousness itself.
You're absolutely right. He's pushing back against the idea that consciousness is just a passive byproduct of brain activity.
Like it's just along for the ride, watching the world go by, but not really participating.
Yeah, instead of that, he's proposing that our thoughts, feelings, even our intentions, they actually have a real power, a kind of energetic potential that we've barely begun to understand, let alone tap into.
That's a pretty radical idea, even today. Just imagine if our minds could actually emit some form of energy that can affect other minds, or even influence the physical world around us. It would completely change how we view ourselves and our place in the universe.
It would be a total game changer. And while it's thrilling to think about, we also need to acknowledge that, as of right now, Berger's ideas about psychic energy are still highly speculative. We need a lot more research and solid evidence before we can definitively say if it's a real phenomenon.
Right, we're not saying this is a done deal or anything. We're deep in what-if territory here.
Hmm.
But that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. It's all about pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible, and being open to the idea that the universe might be far stranger and more wondrous than we currently imagine.
I couldn't agree more. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs happen when we're willing to ask those seemingly impossible questions and really explore unconventional ideas, even if they end up leading us down a different path than we initially expected. So let's keep that spirit of curiosity alive as we delve deeper into this fascinating world that Berger has opened up for us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Hans Berger's work. I don't know about you, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around this idea of psychic energy. It's such a fascinating concept.
Yeah, it really is. And you know what makes Berger's theory even more intriguing is how he ties this idea of psychic energy back to his work with the EEG, the technology he invented to measure those electrical brainwaves.
Right, we were talking about how he observed those decreases in electrical voltage when a person was really focused or engaged in intense mental effort. Like that example with the doctor solving a math problem and how his brain waves dipped while he was working on it. It's like his brain needed to tap into some hidden energy reserve to power through that tough mental task.
Yeah, exactly. And that observation is what really set Berger's mind racing. He started to think that maybe this dip in voltage wasn't just a decrease in energy, but a transformation of energy.
So instead of just less energy, it's a change from one type of energy to another, like going from electrical energy to this other form he calls psychic energy.
That's the heart of his hypothesis. And remember, Berger wasn't just some armchair philosopher throwing out wild ideas. He was a serious scientist, and all of this was based on his observations and data from his EEG experiments.
It's true. He was trying to make sense of what he was seeing in his research, but even so, this idea of psychic energy, it pushes the boundaries of what we usually think of as science, wouldn't you say?
It definitely has a kind of mystical, almost spiritual vibe to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It goes beyond the usual nuts and bolts explanations we often see in science.
It does. It's kind of exciting though, isn't it?
It is. I think that's what makes Berger's work so compelling. He wasn't afraid to step outside of the usual scientific box and explore these unconventional ideas. He was truly driven by this deep curiosity to understand how consciousness works, and he was willing to follow that curiosity wherever it led him.
He really blazed a new trail, didn't he? And what's even more radical is how he's suggesting that consciousness isn't just a passive thing, but an active force.
Mm.
Like our thoughts can actually impact the world around us.
Yeah. It's like he's saying that we have this untapped power within us. Our thoughts, beliefs, intentions, they all have this energetic potential that we haven't even scratched the surface of.
It's a mind-blowing concept. It almost makes you think that we're all interconnected by this invisible network of energy, and our thoughts and feelings are constantly sending out ripples, influencing each other in subtle ways that we might not even be aware of.
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about how the mind works, doesn't it? And even though Berger's specific ideas about telepathy and psychic energy are still speculative, they raise some really profound questions.
They do. And it's important to remember that we need more research and evidence before we can say for sure whether psychic energy is a real thing or not. But regardless of whether telepathy turns out to be the right explanation, I think exploring Berger's work leads us to a deeper appreciation of just how complex and amazing the human mind truly is.
I absolutely agree. And sometimes the most important discoveries come from being bold enough to ask those big, even impossible questions and explore those unconventional ideas. Who knows what mysteries we might uncover if we keep our minds open to the possibilities?
It's a good reminder that we still have so much to learn and discover. The human mind is a vast and uncharted territory, and we're really just beginning to understand it. So on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to consider. If our minds really do have the power to shape reality, to connect with each other in ways that we don't fully grasp yet, what does that mean for how we live our lives? How can we use that power wisely and responsibly?
It's definitely something worth thinking about as we continue to explore the incredible potential of the human mind.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into telepathy and psychic energy. It's been a wild ride.
It has. Keep those minds open, everyone, and who knows what other mysteries we'll uncover together in the future.